Okay, so we left off working on that registration form. So let's take a look at where we left off by taking a look at the simulator. Okay, sorry about that. So we get to the login screen and try to create that user. We're going to get some email validation errors. We've got our form here to take in the user's information. I did change a little bit here. If you remember yesterday or the day before when we worked on this, I went into the create user and I had two calls here basically, one for creating the user using Firebase, and then another one that was going to be our CloudKit registration. I think that was actually in the login manager. Well, I've separated those two things out. Sorry, that was in my view controller here. So yes, we had a login manager creating the user, and then we also had that register user as a separate call. That got consolidated into this new user controller. That way, he just says go create the user, and then based on what happens there, we're either going to dismiss the view controller or present an alert. So we're just focused on the view here. But if we go inside this create, we're going to pass it that user. We're going to use Firebase to create that user. And then we're going to use that new endpoint to actually register them in CloudKit so that we can register for push notifications. The create user, there's the Firebase call where we just pass it the username and password. And then in our register user, that is where we're going to build that JSON and send it to a new endpoint, which we're going to hopefully work on and finish up today. So it'll go to my local server, and we'll get into that next. So there's the form. I also added some validations. So that should, password must be 6 characters or long. So it did change what I had before by consolidating that call. Before, if I took an error during create user, I could present the error and then dismiss it as part of that. But now that I've kind of consolidated in this create user, I only have one. So I may have to add another option here or something so that I can go back so that they can correct that password. Okay, but we'll work on that in another session. I just really want to focus on starting that endpoint. And now I just want to say create that user. Click on register. So I added another flag on my little data source here to kind of tell me if I need to have that field required or not. So now it's going to tell me that my field is required, and I should pop-up display that says first name is required. I pop in my name. I get another one that will tell me last name is required. And so on and so forth for each of those fields. Okay, but for now, let's focus on creating that endpoint. So I already have a local server and it's already doing some other messaging. But we will create a new endpoint here. We're going to call that endpoint register. Okay. So I know I have some code that I can just go over here and kind of copy to start with. To save me a little bit of typing. Basically, I'm just saying for now, let's display the errors. We're going to report anything that's a warning. I have a configuration file. I don't need this. I'm going to leave it in because eventually I am going to add those JSON web tokens. I'm going to make sure my content header says that I'm building a JSON reply. And I know I need to get this eventually. So I'm just going to also copy that over to get the authorization function. Okay, that looks pretty good to start with. And I know I need this stuff here. And we'll go over that in just a second. So out of the PHP server, I'm going to get the request method. I'm going to get the request information. I'm going to get the input JSON. And on my path, I know that we were looking at something in Xcode. In my endpoints for now, we're going to focus on this user path. Okay. So also in Xcode, we were looking at that call, and it's going to be just a JSON with first name. So we're just going to go ahead and just going to start creating something so I have something in place to test this with. So for now, let's just dump the input object. And we'll exit. Okay. So I've sent that to my local server, and I do see that the JSON data is getting posted correctly, which is just basically echoing back the data that I sent. So as far as my endpoint goes, there's just a few things we can clean up. Let's go ahead and pull the data out that we need. So I know I've got my first name is going to be input. First name. And we're going to repeat that for last name, email, business ID, business name, last name, email, business ID, and business name. another overview section. So you want to access CloudKit. You want to access the dashboard. You want to add CloudKit to your project. Now, I'm actually doing this. I'm not adding the capability to do CloudKit in this application. It is currently off. I will have an administration target, and that will have CloudKit enabled. So in order to enable it, you just go to your base project, your info. You want to click on capabilities on the appropriate target. Usually, a typical project would just have one target. You want to turn on CloudKit, which will open up this container option. It will automatically create a container based on the current project you are in, or you can actually use another container that you have in your CloudKit. Once that is set, you can click on your CloudKit dashboard, which will open up in Safari the dashboard. So I will click back over and we'll take a look at back over into Dreamweaver. And I've already started to create a folder that's going to hold my CloudKit stuff. So I want a new file. And one of the things we looked at was something called CK container. So let's just go ahead and create that class. So as I said, I have a framework already in place that's doing the Apple push notification service. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to follow something very closely with um, CloudKit's framework, but the same concepts, I guess, are there. But we just want to create a class called CKContainer. And we are going to probably be bouncing around between Apple's um, documentation, unless you're fine with me just going on and on about it. So let's create a okay. So what do I want these objects to be? Well, I want them to be a CK database. Okay. And I want them to be specific CK databases, but let's finish just the base of this class just to make sure we're somewhat complete. Sometimes I just create those variables as public because I'm doing too much Swift anymore, where even variables are, to me, as close to a function as you need in Swift. Okay, so return this ID. So now we've got this other class called CK database that we need to talk about. So again, let's take a look at sake of being consistent. Okay, so then I know I need another class called CK database. Can't type. Okay. I don't know. I haven't really tested this, so we're all learning something. I thought I missed that. And we saw on there that there was a save operation on the database. And we will get to that in a minute. And then we also know, based on the API that we were looking at, that there's going to be a CK record. There's a record type. There's a record name. And there was something called fields, which I'm going to say right now is an array. Again, it's a bunch of key value pairs, which works fine for the PHP array. Okay, so if I create one, I know I've got the record type. I should have the record type. I might have a record name. And then I know I've got a bunch of key value pairs. Okay, so that's the start of the CK record guy. Now, let's take a look at the web service guide again. And then I think we'll probably take a break so that I can get my Starbucks, and then we can continue completing whatever other PHP classes we need. Okay, so the CK operation we saw had an operation type, and it had a record. So when we create him, I think I'm already ready for lunch. Okay, so the operation is going to have a record. The record has fields. The database will take basically a record, create the operation to save the record. It's kind of the high level copy of what Apple's doing with their CloudKit, which is close to what these other database frameworks that would happen. So on top of a CK operation, we want the actual request. So I am going to build a CK request. It's going to be at the and this request object is going to have a request type, which is going to be basically the path on that URL. It's going to have operations, which is going to be, I think, an array. We're only going to do one operation anyway, but let's just make it as close as to what we want. I believe this is what I want it to look like. Okay. So there's a few more classes I know we need, but because we talked about CK error. And of course, we'll need some type of response. Okay. So I'll be back this afternoon.